Good evening, I'm Oliver Brandis, and I'm here to talk about water. Now that's an unusual thing for a variety of reasons, mostly because it takes images like this to get us to think about or talk about water in Canada. And in fact, it may not be the reality. We often think of the globe, the Earth, as this wonderful blue pearl, this idea of a water planet, but really how much water is there? It's a much smaller amount than most people think. 2.5% is the amount of water that's fresh on this blue planet of ours, and an even smaller amount, the stuff that we relate to, the 0.3% that is groundwater or surface water where we mostly live. The reality is we do not have nearly as much water as we think, and in fact this myth of abundance is what pervades all that we do and think about, and in fact our laws, our policies, and our governance. I could ask this room, who cares about water? And of course, this room would be filled with people who agree that water is very important. Well, you're not alone, because 93% of Canadians agree that water is our most precious resource and is critical. But yet we don't think about it, or it doesn't reflect in many of our policies and laws. It's a simple molecule, right? Yet very complicated to manage, to govern, to deal with in law. So in a legal sense, when we look at water, you and I, of course, understand water as this one thing. But legally, that's not how it is at all. From the surface to things like habitat for fish, to environmental flows, to navigation, to groundwater, to urban water, to the rainwater we have in our houses, to drinking water, to wastewater, and how we treat it. All of these are treated entirely different under law. And this is an important initial characteristic. This idea of siloed or fragmented, the idea disconnected from nature, these are the characteristics that we'll come back to. So who decides? And that's a complex question here in Canada, because we have 4 orders of government, and we have a constitution that deals with many important issues, but the word water is not mentioned once in the Constitution. And in fact, all 4 orders have a role to play. The federal, the provincial, Aboriginal governments, and of course the local. These together are who decides, but that makes for tricky territory. So when we're talking about law, policy, and governance, and we want to talk about where we might be going, we need to also understand where we came from, because these issues are deeply contextual. So of course, from a colonial perspective, this is where we came from, certainly out here in the West. This pioneer Wild West approach, resource development, ignorant of First Nations ethics and approaches, primarily dealing with creating certainty for development to happen. This was the foundation, the legal foundation, which was really to facilitate gold mining and agricultural development. Totally ignorant of this idea of rights and title, and to this day the Crown still asserts this ownership. Really, its purpose, and this is 100 years, I'm trying to do 100 years in one slide, shows us that we're trying to capture certainty to create this development. It was never an environmental law at all. In fact, all it was resource extraction rules. There were a number of core principles that guided this approach, and they still exist today. I'm going to emphasize on one. It's called first in time, first in right. So this is the audience participation part. Who's heard of first in time, first in right? I know there's a few because I arranged some tickets. Well, all of you actually know, because it's that old adage from kindergarten. I had it first. That's what first in time, first in right means. And the irony in Canada is we're law-abiding, so it's who did our paperwork first. So some of our very first users, such as First Nations and Aboriginal people, don't even count in that lineup. Fundamentally, we talk about the water laws as the lords of yesterday, highly discretionary, uncoordinated, and disconnected from the environment. So where are we today? Well, British Columbia, Canada indeed, is a different place. High tech, high rises, increasingly higher tides. Water connects to all the key issues of the day. When we talk about water security, Aboriginal rights, drinking water, healthy cities, innovation, all of these are bound by water. And of course, when you have increasing scarcity and increasing use, this is what you get: conflict. And as we've learned a little bit about climate change, I'm not going to go into the science, but I'm going to give you an analogy. If climate change is the shark, water will be its teeth, meaning that's how you will feel the effects of climate change. It will be in our changed water systems. So we as Canadians, We know about these issues, but we also are very concerned about protecting our freshwater resources. And we intuitively know what that entails. It entails a mix of expertise and science, enforcing the rules, some local control. This collectively is part of what we think the rules and who should decide play a part. So this is the part of the talk where I kind of look into the misty parts of the crystal ball into the future. And this is, of course, an uncertain future. I'm going to give you one option. I'm not suggesting this is what will happen or is even likely to happen, but it has the potential to happen. And how do I know this? Well, because we know from many examples all around the world, this is what the future of water law is in those crisis places. They move from the idea of managing the watershed to managing people in watersheds. That's a fundamental change. And this doesn't happen by some kind of water law magic, even though at my center at the university, I like to pretend we do some water law magic. It actually looks different in character and approach. And the top line here, you can see, that's how the old approach works. Over time, we humans keep allocating those licenses for more and more use. And over time, the environment and some of the key users get less and less. That's not going to work in the long term. Fundamentally, we're looking at a shift where we think about an allocation for the environment, where water for nature is a fundamental part, and then we think about how we humans will share what remains. So this kind of law is more than just pushing paper around. In fact, it's about changing how we make some of these decisions. It's a shared decision-making at the watershed level. And this is not an if, but when question, because every place in the world that faces this has this crisis. What does that look like? Well, these are a picture of some toys that we're all familiar with. My young daughters even still play with these. They're nested systems, and that's exactly what an ecological system is, and that's what our legal system will need to do. So we need to rethink governance in this watershed context. We have to understand that government is critical, but it's broader. First Nations, civil society, business, community, all have to work together, both for the formal, the written down kinds of laws, but also those informal structures. And ultimately, we're talking about integrating nature into all aspects of decision making. I'm going to end on this slide, and I'm going to tell you that water, not oil, will define the 21st century. We need to use less and keep it clean. We need to use what we take more productively. We need to learn to share and resolve conflicts. And most importantly, we need to leave enough water in the system to ensure those healthy, proper functioning systems. It's about citizenship, and it's about hydro-citizenships. It's a movement, and that's what that looks like. Thank you.